Hey everyone, this is Catherine Shen, host of Where We Live. Before we get to the show today, I need to take a quick moment here to talk about something that may feel unrelated to today's show, but it is very much related, important, and urgent. Last week, Congress defunded public media. Connecticut Public lost 10% of its funding, which adds up to more than $2 million. So it's too soon to know what the full impact will be, but what we do know is there will be changes to what you listen, what you read, and what you watch. Shows you enjoy, too, will be harder to make. News in rural communities will be harder to cover. And free and freely accessible programming you enjoy will also be in jeopardy. Whether you agree with Congress's decision or not doesn't really matter right now, because what does matter is that you're here, you're listening. And that tells me you find something worthwhile about this show, maybe about public radio in general. If that's true, I ask you to donate. Connecticut Public needs monthly donors to help replace what we've lost and protect what you stand to lose. Congress made up its mind. Today it's your turn to make up yours. If you like listening to Connecticut Public, if you depend on NPR news stories from across the country and the world, the best thing you can do today is to give. You can start a monthly donation at ctpublic.org/donate. Monthly donations will really help us keep going. Now, back to the show. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When ChatGPT was first released in 2022, the Where We Live team was curious. How would it impact the work of writers? We had a really good time experimenting with ChatGPT, asking it to write custom poems and haikus in the style of our favorite writers, but it didn't seem to create anything close to great literature in our very humble opinions. We even had it create a question for us to use for a show we did on ChatGPT, but our guest could tell it was created through a machine, and he was not impressed. But that's not to say AI isn't impacting the creative arts. Today, we're exploring how AI is helping to create art and asking if AI is good or bad for the creative process. And if you're an artist, writer, actor, musician, designer, or a creator of any kind, we would love to hear from you. Are you utilizing AI in your craft? Let us know how. 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Joining us now is Kevin Ramsey. He's an assistant professor of theater at the University of Hartford. Kevin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
And also with us is Clement Valla. He's an artist and department head of the Art, Computation, and Sound BFA at the Rhode Island School of Design. Clement, welcome to Where We Live.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Clement, I want to start with you here. As we mentioned earlier, AI has been on the market for a while now. Feels like we've been talking about it for a very long time. But I think we're just starting to think about using AI in creative ways. So curious to hear, how have you been thinking about AI and how it's impacting the art world?
Sure. I think the sort of latest version of AI has made a big splash in the media. At RISD, we've been thinking about AI for a very long time in the context of generative art. I think my colleagues and I would actually argue that AI has a 3,000-year-old history. There's sort of great examples of art and even town and urban planning made with fractal systems in Africa, for example. So you've got these generative systems that are used for architecture, urban planning, design, and it even goes to the organization of religion or philosophy in certain societies. So, or the terracotta army is a great example of generative art, sort of 8 heads, 12 torsos, 7 arms, and you can generate thousands of unique individual artworks, essentially. So it's just a very different, maybe industrial way of thinking about art and manufacturing and production. In the 20th century, clearly that accelerates with the invention of computers and this idea, this sort of search for a discovery of like a program that would mimic like a piece of code that would mimic the human brain. And where we are now is a statistics engine, right? So a probability engine. We take all the things that humans have created and posted online and we sort of smush them together and hope something that approximates a lot of that comes out. And so, we've been approaching it in all kinds of different ways, playing with it. Maybe our try to hold off good and bad judgments, but try and find avenues that are fruitful and less fruitful, I think, are ways that we try and look at it and play with it with our students.
Well, it's interesting because we actually just recently had a conversation talking about the role or the relationship that artists have with technology, and this idea that technology doesn't necessarily have to be digital. It can be other tools that artists use to create their craft, right? But of course, in this case, we are talking about something digital. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of using AI as a tool, because artists do use many tools to create their art and their craft. And we've seen a lot of tools that come onto the market in the last several years, like we're talking about like Adobe. We use that in our industry a lot. And also, what about life before Photoshop, when everyone was using Photoshop at some point in the digital world? But so how do we distinguish these different types of tools with AI?
No.
Actually,
Go,
Kevin,
go. Comment. No.
Please, sorry.
No, I think the things that we're thinking a lot about at the University of Hartford is what does it mean to create and to teach and perform in an age of algorithms? How is that going to impact us, and where are we going with that? And these conversations that we're having about AI, artists have always used technological tools to help develop their craft. A paintbrush is a technology, right? All of it is part of this technology. What has happened is that it's interesting when we think about technology and robots, what they've created in the mindset. When you think about The Matrix, when you think about Terminator, they're the bad guys. As an artist, we've always used this technology to, again, not to replace our humanness, but to tap deeper into our humanness. And as educators, I think we have to be aware that the world has changed, and it continues to change. And every generation ushers in these new ideas. And technology, again, we were talking earlier of how it's changing our behavior, of how we relate to each other. I'm back and forth, because there are some cons about how it can also not allow our students to be critical thinkers if we're constantly going somewhere to get help and support. So these conversations are fascinating to me.
Right. Yeah. And it's certainly ongoing. And I think it's so fluid because I think it changes every day and it's changing so fast. Every other day I feel like there's a tool within this tool that we can use. But whether or not we should use it is a different question. And we're going to dig deeper into sort of how this tool could impact how our brain works, especially with our younger people. But Clement, I'm curious to hear what you think too in terms of using AI as a tool, and what kind of impacts are you seeing in terms of the different artistic mediums in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love what Kevin was saying about not replacing our humanness, but delving deeper into it. I think that's absolutely correct. I think students at RISD were very interested in image, like sort of generative image AI, Gen AI, when it first came out, but very quickly understood the style, the vibe, the kind of schlop that it was producing, and quickly moved away from that. What I'm seeing right now in art schools, the students that are producing interesting work are using AI as an intermediary. They are usually AI doesn't even touch the final product. They're using AI. I often use the example of the architect Frank Gehry, who developed these very complicated structures. And then he also developed a separate company called Gehry Technologies, full of technologists. Well, each of his architecture teams had one of these technologists embedded within it. And the technologist was there to develop software to solve these really complicated spatial problems. And it allowed him to produce completely different kinds of architectures. And what I'm seeing happening with AI a little bit is our students can now have their own mini creative technologist, right? To solve problems that didn't even exist 20 minutes ago.
Right.
And that's becoming really interesting. So it's less of, it's not generating the final image, but it's more sort of like building tools or processes or procedures that students are responding to and outputting completely incredible things.
It's almost,
that's really exciting to me, yeah.
right. It's almost like problem solving as you're moving along when you don't have a person, like a technologist to help you with, but this is a great example to use AI as a tool. And what we really wanted to do with this conversation was to make sure that we try to get from the various different perspectives and all of the mediums that art includes. And Kevin, you're in theater. So what does that look like in theater when you're, what's the role, does AI have a role in theater when you're working and teaching it?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, there's script writing software, there's choreographic software, music software that allows, again, as an aid, as a collaborator, as opposed to as a replacement. I think a lot about this idea of our traditions, and I think that's what's creating this uncomfortable space right now. We've lived in a tradition for a very long time of how art is created. And as Clement was saying, technology has always been a part of it. But because it's moving so fast from day to day, that I think it's creating a little anxiety because there's always that other side of the bad actor. And I don't mean the performance actor. I mean those who can get their hands on super intelligence, creating this space in these computers. And I think the fear is, as I talk to colleagues, will computers become smarter than human beings to somehow then control and dictate what we do? I don't think I'm there yet.
Well, that seems to be a question that we've been asking since the dawn of time, I feel like.
Certainly. And again, every technology has advanced and changed who we are as human beings, of how we look at the world. I'm excited to be alive right now, right? You know, you think about when you're in elementary school and you would read about history and these defining moments, these pivotal moments that are shifting our cultural understanding of who we are, and we're living in it. And so I can't think of them. But I guess everybody says the time they were living was the most exciting time for them.
I mean, we're seeing so many eras come back right now.
Yes.
So this is a really interesting time because we're sort of growing up in the advent of the internet. Certainly, that was a game changer for many of us. And in terms of performing arts, because we've seen a lot of changes within that world too, and that's only one world that we're talking about today. How have we seen this technology impact the performing arts?
I look at, I think of the human experience can't ever be replaced, is my feeling. That's my bias. I don't think that can ever be replaced. But I think there's equity that can happen. When I think about text, recognizable text that could help somebody who's visually impaired be able to read stage directions, be able to use technology for students who may have a hard time at times being able to do critical thinking and, say, unpacking Shakespeare. Everybody learns differently. Right? There's not one fit that fits all. And again, I just think these tools are here to aid us. And at the same time, the idea of when television came in and impacted radio. So we hear, we feel, we're experiencing all of this very differently depending on the technology in which we're using.
Well, I want to ask Clement about the collaboration piece too, but before we go there, I just wanted to bring this as an example because we were talking about it earlier. Is one of the things that came out in terms of digital performing arts are holograms of people with certain likeness performing dances or theater. Can you talk about what about that, using holograms as a way to entertain?
I remember a couple of, maybe 5 or 6 years back at Coachella, I think there was a hologram of Snoop Dogg. There's a hologram of Michael Jackson. There's a hologram, right? There are these places, and there's also CGI, computer-generated images that are beginning to show up in commercials. And that is concerning to unions across the country. Any performing arts union are very concerned about AI as well, right? So we're at this pivotal moment. to have to create some policies around how we're going to use it. And I think instead of running from it, those are the conversations we should have. And how do we engage our students so that, because this is going to be the world that they're going to be inheriting.
Right. And Clement, back to the sort of using AI as a way for collaboration. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's going to be the kind of richest area for artists to explore. There was a painter, Harold Cohen, who developed an AI in the 1970s, and he worked on it for 40 or 50 years until he passed away recently. He just had an exhibition at the Whitney. And he kind of grappled with these questions his whole life. So I kind of like to look at him a lot. And at the beginning, when he first started developing this robot called Aaron, he said, no, Aaron's not an artist. Aaron's just following rules and instructions. That's not art. And by the end of his life, he had a much more complicated take. And he authored a document called Collaborations with My Other Self. And so, there's this way in which technology can be a mirror to humans. There's this way in which technology can produce gaps or dissonances that the human brain is really good at, like, reacting to or solving. So it can almost create problems that can trigger new thoughts in the human brain. And I think those kinds of things are really interesting. But then I couldn't agree more with Kevin. This fear of bad actors on the one hand, this fear of let's call it corporate concentration, right? That's the hologram issue is this idea that, like, AI might be used to just concentrate even more wealth and put artists out of jobs because there's this idea that, like, there's a cheaper, not as good alternative. Well, we know what tends to happen when cheaper, less good alternatives come around. And so I think it is, in education at least, it is about developing an ethics, I think, and the politics around these issues without running away from them. They're here. It's sort of like the question of AI in art, to me, is like the question of a tree. Is a tree good or bad for art? It just is. Let's talk about its impacts and let's develop these ethics and these ideas, and with nuance, I think, would be the key thing that I would want to explore with students.
Well, and also with the idea of developing and, of course, the creating process, we haven't talked about the fact that many AI are really learning models, meaning that the more that they're used, the more that they learn, the more data that they're being fed, obviously the more information that they're going to have, which also means that perhaps these models will sometimes start to produce the same content. So, Kevin, do you think we could be losing some originality in the arts the more we use this technology?
Great question. We have always, as creators, borrowed from sources. That's been part of our journey. And so...
Well, you mentioned Shakespeare earlier.
Right. Again...
let's talk about borrowing a lot of things from one person.
Right. I mean, with that regard. And so, again, I think we have to be very careful not to overreact. Again, I was having a conversation with a colleague 2 nights ago. Everybody remember 1999 when we were going to go into the year 2000 and the world was going to come to an end?
I remember that moment very well. We're still here.
We're still here. So with regard to that, I just think these conversations are what is important right now on the education landscape, right? It may feel different, again, in a different industry of how they are choosing to use AI. Again, at the university, we are in the process. Committees were formed last year to begin to get their hand around the uses of AI as a university. That is still in the works, right? And so what we're advising, at least within my department, is that every teacher has the right in their syllabus to say you may or may not use, how you can use, but these conversations will need to be had. Like, we're in that world now, that these conversations, we're here.
Clement, I'm curious as to your thoughts too, because earlier we talked about using AI as a way to sort of help with coming up with solutions or pinpointing questions or problems when students are working on these projects. What about initial concepts of creativity, maybe in the brainstorming phase, is that a good place to use AI? Are there ways that it should not be used as a tool? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that question. The one is in education, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I do think there are moments where students absolutely should not be using AI as a shortcut, simply as a learning process, right? To learn about your embodied self, about your sort of tendencies as an artist, to learn what is coming from inside you. But I do think as a brainstorming process, it can be used in really fruitful ways. Like I said, the human mind, I think, is really good at forming links between disparate things. Mm-hmm. So there's a, if you take A plus B and A and B kind of don't make any sense together, that's often a great start to a really wonderful drawing or a piece of music or a theater, right? It's sort of like putting two things together. Kevin was saying artists borrow. I think the greatest artists borrow from like country music and hip hop and somehow figure out how to put it together. And that's totally new and surprising. I think AI could be used to generate those kinds of disjunctures and discontinuities. I think we get into a problem where we just start to see it as rote production. But I would also add that that's not unique to AI. I think we live in a system where rote production is all around us all the time. This idea of speed, efficiency, we're just stocking the shelves over and over. Art is just stocking the shelves. We already are in a system where rote production is just there. And I think as educators, I don't know about you, Kevin, but I'm always trying to get my students to slow down.
Yeah.
Think, and look and pay attention.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's that place. There's no substitution. Mm-hmm. There's no substitution for process. Yeah. Right. There's no substitution for that as an artist.
Well, I also like that you're both of you have mentioned how I think there is this fear, especially today, where we're afraid that the tool is going to replace thinking, which I suppose you can say it is in some ways, and we're going to hear about that in a little bit. But it's also a tool to practice critical thinking, especially the examples that Clement, you just mentioned, that when you have this tool earlier in your project, let's say for students, they're going to find issues early in the project and start to figure out, what went wrong? What can I do to make this more smooth? What can I do to actually create a good project? Kevin, you're nodding your head.
No, that's why you're in school, to ask questions.
Right.
It's not about the result right now. Mm-hmm. For me, it's all about the process. If I can understand these processes, then I can take this anywhere in the world, and hopefully I can repeat those processes. Certainly, as human beings, things seem to have sped up, where we don't spend much time now critically thinking, really sitting with issues. We get these little 15-second sound bites or 140 characters in a text, and that's the way in which we're communicating now. I think AI deserves some real critical thinking in terms of, because, again, we haven't talked much about the cons of AI, right? The dangers of it as well. But I think there are a lot of benefits of how it can be used. I mean, I look at filmmakers, right? I'm working on a documentary right now, and we're cutting this film, and it has this text-based AI where all of the dialogue just comes up on the screen. So now you can edit based on text as opposed to images. It has sped up the process of editing.
So I have to go to break soon, but want to do a quick thought from Clement. Anything you want to respond to with what Kevin just said?
No, I couldn't agree more with what Kevin said. And I do think that the cons are worth discussing and paying attention to. And we haven't talked about labor and markets and all those other issues kind of surrounding art. But I think as a tool to really reflect on yourself and your process and your art, I think there could be really interesting ways to use it. And I think it's that transparency. Mm-hmm. I think we get into a really bad place where students are hiding it, and that becomes plagiarism to me. It's the openness and the transparency of that discussion that can be really enriching.
And we're going to be talking about all of that after a quick break. You've been listening to Kevin Ramsey from University of Hartford, and also Clement Vala, who's from the Rhode Island School of Design. And listeners, let us know if you use AI. How do you feel having a ready-made image generated in seconds? And do you think AI can make a true work of art? give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're exploring how artificial intelligence is impacting art and the creative process. Joining us now is Roger Beatty. He's an associate professor of psychology at Pennsylvania State University, researching how people think creatively. Roger, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And still with us is Clement Vala from the Rhode Island School of Design and Kevin Ramsey from the University of Hartford. So, Roger, you've been following along the conversation. Tell us, what do we know about how AI is impacting the creative process?
Yeah, so it's been a really fascinating conversation so far, and I've been kind of reflecting on my own work. So I come from psychology, as you mentioned, and I'm interested in understanding how AI might be impacting creative thinking in particular. So in our work, we're focused on the cognitive processes involved in things like brainstorming, you mentioned, coming up with ideas, but also evaluating them as well. And I think that's something that'd be interesting to talk about as well, is AI as kind of like a feedback system. So what we're seeing, and what others have found so far, is, along the lines of what we've been talking so far. There's some pros and some cons, seemingly, but this is very much a dynamic line of research. So what the literature, again, from psychology is showing so far is that AI can help people generate more original ideas. And I should also clarify that I'm coming from, like, again, more kind of like brainstorming, everyday creative thinking, and not as much on the level of art and professional, or what we might call like big C creativity. A lot of these studies are kind of like, everyday brainstorming, problem solving, and so forth. And some of the findings have been that AI can help people come up with better ideas in that early stage of brainstorming. But on the other hand, there have been pretty consistent findings that the ideas that people come up with tend to be pretty similar to each other if you put them together. So if you compare people working with ChatGPT or another large language model on a brainstorming task, and then you compare them to another group of people that don't have access to AI, you see that the ideas of people who do have access to AI tend to be more similar to each other. So you have this kind of homogenization or sameness that can come out in these, again, early stage brainstorming type sessions. And I think that kind of speaks to the diversity of human experience that can be kind of washed out or not as emphasized if you have access to these tools. And so, again, trying to understand what are the cases where you're seeing a benefit, and the cases where it might not be so beneficial.
Well, was there anything that Kevin or Clement shared earlier, Roger, that you would like to respond to? Anything that jumped out?
Yeah, I think relevant to what I've been talking about here, again, in terms of idea generation, Clement mentioned about putting two things together, and remote association is this as a term that we use a lot in my field, and I think that could be a source of inspiration where people might have a narrow way of thinking about things. They're exposed to different concepts that we know this is a very important aspect of creative thinking, where you're putting two things together and then turning that over in your mind and making more out of those two concepts that might not have an obvious connection to them. Also thought it was interesting to hear about technology as a mirror, and maybe breaking down the barrier of thinking about us as separate from these systems, and trying to think about how we can move towards a more hybrid way of, again, kind of understanding our own creative thought process. I thought that was very interesting. Mm-hmm. And what Kevin said about the human experience cannot be replaced, I think there's a lot of merit to that as well. I think that resonates with people's experience of art. And, I think that people will continue to want to go see artists perform. Might be interesting to go see a robot perform on stage once. But beyond that, I think people are really interested in seeing other humans express themselves in creative ways. And there's some evidence on that as well. So there's studies comparing the reception of AI-generated versus human-generated artworks or kind of image generation. And the research pretty consistently finds that when people know that something is purely AI-generated, they prefer the human stuff more. And that, again, speaks to, I think, the human experience and the appreciation of people expressing themselves in creative ways and what can't be captured by AI alone. But yeah, a lot more that can be unpacked here.
Right. And actually, I'm interested to hear, too, from your standpoint, Roger, in terms of the accessibility. And especially, I think some people see AI as a way to get into certain art worlds that they may or may not have the skills to be a part of. But could we see more people enter the arts with this technology being so readily accessible?
Yeah, I think so to some extent. Kevin also talked about the, I would say maybe democratization of some of this, some access to these tools of people who have never produced anything that they would call creative. People don't see themselves as creative. There's research showing that working with generative AI on creative tasks can boost people's creative self-efficacy or creative self-concept, seeing yourself as someone that can do creative work in some way. We can talk about the ownership and whose idea that is and the complications of that. But I think that, yeah, you can have people really opening up and expressing themselves in ways that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do before without the kind of more technical skills. I think that at the same time, there's still a lot of value, of course, in studying the arts and the creative process in more depth. But if it's a gateway for people to get more into it, I think that can be valuable.
Well, and on the note of it being a potential gateway for people to get into perhaps certain arts that they weren't able to get into earlier, Clement and Kevin, I want to pose this question to both of you. Clement, we'll start with you here, especially since this is a technology that's still developing, and I imagine it's going to continue to develop. And sometimes it feels like it can't quite capture what we're hoping to do with said creativity. So in which ways does this technology actually give us less control over what we can do with creativity?
That's a really interesting and tough question. I mean, I think it all has to do with I think just paying attention. I think the minute you try to start using it as a shortcut, I think there you're actually just outputting something that is sort of satisfying in the moment. There might even be like a boost of serotonin or whatever. You're like, yeah, cool, here's the answer. But in the long term, I think, I don't know, I worry so much about that homogenization that Roger was just talking about. To me, that's the death of art, right? When you're just producing the same stuff over and over again as everyone else. So I worry a lot about shortcuts. I would say that I think is my big fear.
Well, and Kevin, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of originality, which we copy a lot from people. We are inspired by others, and we were using Shakespeare earlier as an example. So what are your thoughts in terms of AI, still a developing technology, and perhaps the limitations of what it can give us in terms of creative works?
Yeah, again, it can help as an aid, as a collaborator to maybe look at give an example. A young student is having problems coming up with a choreographic idea, right? So you input a prompt, what some choreographic ideas around a particular song. It may give you a prompt. It won't choreograph it for you, or it may even choreograph it for you. What is going to be the quality of that choreography?
Right.
What is going to be the quality of that poem? What is going to be the quality of that play? Right now, what I've seen is that it's not outputting Pulitzer Prize winning work right now. That is still coming from the human being. This conversation, listening to Roger and both Clement, it's, again, when I think about technology, it continues to impact us. And we have to shift and evolve, right? So when we were radio listeners, we would remember more because all we had was that audio experience.
Mm-hmm.
TV came in, that impacted us in a different way, right? Digital technology has come in, which is also impacting us. I think the idea of transparency, I think the other thought came to me that I'm wondering if AI is going to actually help universities not to continue to be so siloed in how they approach work. I think the arts actually put the arms around every other discipline. We get to talk about all the other things. And I think at the University of Hartford, right, we have a computer engineering, technology and architecture school that has a red robot. And I keep having this thought about how do we integrate that? How do we begin to work alongside of other schools so that for us, it's not just about putting out actors, it's about putting out young people who have digital literacy, an understanding of the world in which they're entering, and how are those tools going to help them as a creative storyteller, not just as an actor.
Well, and Roger, sort of following along that thought processes, because we've been talking about how AI can be used as a tool to problem solve or critical thinking. But at the same time, could we be losing some of that artistic skill sets because someone else is doing the thinking for you? How do you think AI might impact our ability to develop craft and artistic technique?
Yeah, I think that's a real big question that we're grappling with right now. I think from my research and others, some of the really important cognitive processes that support creative thinking is knowledge. Right, we have to have knowledge about how something works, what has been done before. So if you're trying to come up with something new, sure, you could search online, or you could prompt a language model to tell you and hope that it's accurate. There's a hallucination part of this as well. But yeah, I think these basic processes that we know are important, like memory, knowledge, all these skills and expertises that have been around for so long are clearly we're going to have to reckon with how they're impacted. I mean, maybe people are familiar with the expertise rule of 10 years, 10,000 hours, putting in all this time to become an expert, right? That's kind of like a golden rule, so to speak. I mean, there's some variation around that, but there's a lot of research to show that, really digging into something in a deliberate way, deliberate practice for a long period of time is necessary, maybe not sufficient to be doing very high level creative work. And clearly, there's a threat to that with these kinds of technologies that provide these kind of shortcuts, as we've heard. And so, yeah, I think it's really going to be important for educators and students to be mindful about the shortcuts, and for us as educators to reinforce the kinds of things that we know are important for doing creative work.
Well, and I love what you just said, especially since earlier, too, you mentioned the idea of getting feedback from AI. And we also talked about getting critiqued by AI because you recently held an exhibit at the Science Museum in Poland where visitors were able to interact with an AI model and receive feedback on their artwork. I'm so curious to hear, can you describe what that looks like?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the most fun studies that I was able to contribute to. So this is with one of our collaborators in Poland, and they have access to a museum over there. So he said it's a science museum, and a lot of other science museums, they have these interactive exhibits where you can go up to them and learn something. And in this case, we had an exhibit set up where it was learn about your creativity with AI, or get feedback on your creativity from AI. And we had basically a tablet set up there. And people can go up to the tablet and do really simple line drawing. So this not something that requires you to have your 10,000 hours to do. But people just came up and did a simple line drawing. And we did basically a naturalistic experiment where we had randomly assigned people that came up to this exhibit to get feedback right away from on their ideas. Compared to those who got feedback later. And the feedback was provided by a convolutional neural network, which is another kind of AI model that was trained on over 10,000 line drawings and creativity ratings from humans. And so basically what that model was trained to do is to learn patterns in the line drawings that would predict what a human would say is creative or not. And so we use this for kind of testing purposes, but we were able to use it here in this exhibit and to give people real-time feedback on their ideas on a scale of 1 to 10. So just kind of numeric and not more descriptive. But what we found is that just providing immediate feedback on how original the AI model thought the ideas were slightly boosted people's the creativity of their drawings. So they became slightly more original. Obviously, they didn't like get more technical skills. In the meantime, it was just a little bit of a boost. And it also made them a little bit more accurate at evaluating their own ideas. So this is what I think is really important and a fruitful way of thinking about AI is a way of providing real-time feedback. Feedback is so important in education. And it's really hard to do in a timely way at a large scale. And so what we were able to do here, again, in a very narrow way, was to give people immediate feedback on how original their ideas were. And obviously people use the chat systems for this kind of bouncing their ideas off of something, maybe something they wouldn't necessarily want to share with somebody else. They're getting at least the first pass at how the idea might be received. And so, we've been thinking more about how we can use AI for evaluation, not just the generation stage.
Today, we're asking how AI is impacting the creative arts. With us is Kevin Ramsey from the University of Hartford, Roger Beatty from the Pennsylvania State University, and Clement Valla from Rhode Island School of Design. And they'll all be staying with us after the break. Listeners, let us know if you're using AI to be creative, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Where does the line between artists and artificial intelligence start to blur? Today, we're hearing how AI is impacting creativity and the people who make a living as artists. So, Clement, I want to start with you here. Earlier, you mentioned labor market. How do we think we're going to see AI impact the job market for those entering into creative fields?
Yeah, that becomes a really complicated question. I think we've seen some immediate impact in certain industries where, again, there's a logic not necessarily concerned with creativity, but concerned with sort of production and profit that, sees AI as a way to replace illustrators, essentially. I think we saw it really deeply in the video game industry, for example, where sort of sequels of video games. The idea was, well, we don't need illustrators for the concept art and the story art. We can just take what they've already done and reproduce this illustrator's style. So I do think there are going to be some things to figure out at the copyright level, at the labor level, at the politics level. But you also mentioned Photoshop earlier. I mean, there's an interesting case study there where if you were a darkroom editor in the 80s and 90s when Photoshop came out, that had a huge impact on your job. And there was a sense that jobs were being lost. At the same time, one might argue that Photoshop enabled an image economy that has produced a ton more job. And I'd say many more people now today work in the field of image editing than did 40 or 50 years ago, because image editing has just become a part of culture in a completely different way. So again, this kind of give and take, and I think this nuanced approach of just how we're going to approach it on a social, political, cultural, and ethical level, I think becomes really important.
Well, and Roger, in terms of whether or not AI is able to create art, I know this is debated for a while, but how do we start tackling a big question like that?
Well, I think it depends on how we define a lot of these things. And I think, one way of thinking about creativity is that that there's the product side of it that's been discussed so far, and then there's the process side. And I think we could make comparisons a little bit more straightforward by saying we can compare what a generative AI system can do by itself, or maybe with a simple prompt, and that's a product. And then you can compare that to what what a person can do by themselves. But I think a lot of people would think about creativity as a process. And in that way, there's really vast differences if you're just comparing people and machines and how they produce and all of the things that people draw upon, their knowledge, their imagination, their curiosity, their inspiration. All of these things that contribute to a creative process are just profoundly different from what a machine can do by themselves. And again, this is the kind of separate view of these things, and maybe that doesn't make as much sense. And now we should talk more about the hybrid form of creativity. But yeah, I don't think there's any clear-cut answer to that. It depends on how you think about it and define it yourself, really.
And I'm sure we'll explore the various ways to define and as we go through the changes of AI. And Kevin, kind of looking into the future, because in 2027, the University of Hartford will be hosting an AI symposium.
Not confirmed. It's in the talks, so we don't want to announce it.
All right.
Yet. So
well, what about talk
in the
about?
early stages of thinking about. I had all of this is so timely,
right?
Because I had begun some conversation with both the dean and the provost recently. Mm-hmm. Again, how do we bring thought leaders, creative artists, technicians into a space to convene and to talk about the benefits and the cons of this new world we find ourselves in with AI. And so my colleagues here are two people I would love to stay in touch with because they both have bring up some really salient points around the use of AI. And so, yeah, it's an exciting time, right? And for me, I just hope from the education place, right, that it's going to redefine pedagogy. Mm-hmm. It's going to redefine every aspect of our living.
About 30 seconds here, Clement. What are you looking forward to in terms of following this technology?
Yeah, I'm just really fascinated in the entirely new forms of media, new forms of art that I think are going to come out that we can't even anticipate yet. Mm-hmm. And I think the future generation, the folks who are students now are really going to shape things that we can't even imagine. And that's really exciting to me.
A similar question to you, Roger, 30 seconds. In terms of the neuroscience world, what are you looking for? Next steps?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm again somebody who's really interested in understanding the creative thought process. I want to see this kind of play out more and kind of understand more about how AI is fundamentally changing the cognitive processes and the brain, the creative brain that we think we understand a little bit more about. This is kind of throwing a little bit of a wrench in the system. So I think it's a very exciting time to do research in this space, and I would really encourage students to get involved.
I want to thank our guest this hour for joining the show. You are listening to Roger Beatty, who's an associate professor of psychology at Pennsylvania State University. Roger, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
You are also listening to Clement Vala, who's the artist and department head of the Art Computation and Sound BFA at the Rhode Island School of Design. Clement, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
And Kevin Ramsey, assistant professor of theater at the University of Hartford. Kevin, always a pleasure.
Always. Thank you.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.